Have you ever been asked to prove you have the right to live in your own home? William Hall was just repainting a fence, sage green, the color his grandmother once chose. Then a man appeared, clipboard in hand, HOA logo on his chest, and one cold demand: show me your ID. The problem is, this house was never part of any HOA. This is a story about fake authority, real patience, and the price you pay when you try to force someone out of what rightfully belongs to them. If you enjoy stories about justice and want to follow this one to the end, hit subscribe and turn on notifications right now. Now, let's begin. The paint was called sage green, not mint, not seafoam, not any of those trendy names you see in home magazines. Just sage green, the exact shade my grandmother had picked out 3 years ago, but never got around to using. I found the cans in her garage, still sealed, with a sticky note on top in her handwriting. For the fence, spring project. She passed away in February. I figured finishing what she started was the least I could do. The afternoon sun was warm on my back as I worked the brush along the wooden slats, the smell of fresh paint mixing with the dry autumn air. It was quiet, peaceful. The kind of moment where you feel connected to someone who's gone, like they're watching from somewhere and nodding in approval. My grandmother, Carol Baker, had lived in this house for 47 years. When she left me this place in her will, I didn't hesitate. I quit my remote software job in Seattle, packed everything I owned into a rental truck, and drove 14 hours to Maplewood, Colorado. Some people thought I was crazy for keeping the house instead of selling it, but I owned it free and clear. No mortgage, no liens, no strings. That kind of property doesn't come around twice. I was halfway through the second section of fence when I heard footsteps on the gravel behind me. Not the casual shuffle of a neighbor walking by, but deliberate steps that stopped right at the edge of my property. I turned around, paintbrush still in hand, and saw a man standing on my walkway. He was maybe late 50s, wearing a navy blue polo shirt with some kind of logo embroidered on the chest. Khaki pants, white sneakers, sneakers, and a clipboard tucked under his arm like a weapon he was waiting to deploy. His expression was the kind you see on people who believe they're doing you a favor by showing up uninvited. "Good afternoon," he said, though his tone suggested it was anything but. "I'm Logan Campbell, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, and you are?" I set the brush down on the paint can lid and wiped my hands on the rag hanging from my belt loop. "William Hall, I live here." He glanced at the house, then back at me, then at the fence I'd been painting. His eyes lingered on the sage green if it personally offended him. "I see. And do you have identification to verify that, Mr. Hall? We've had some issues with unauthorized occupants in the area, and I need to confirm your residency status." I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger exactly, but that instinctive resistance you feel when someone oversteps without realizing it, or maybe while fully realizing it. "I don't think I need to show you my ID, I said, keeping my voice even. "This is private property. I'm the owner." Logan's eyebrows rose slightly, as if I'd just said something amusing. He pulled the clipboard from under his arm and made a show of flipping through some pages. "Mr. Hall, I'm not sure you understand how things work here. This paint color," he gestured at the fence, "is not on our approved palette. Any exterior modifications require prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee. You've also failed to submit a project notification form, which was due before any work commenced. These are violations of our community standards." I looked at the fence, then at him, then at the fence again. "I'm painting my own fence," I said slowly, "on my own property, with my own paint." He smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "I understand this might be confusing if you're new to the area, but Willowbrook has standards. We have procedures for residents who choose not to cooperate. I strongly suggest you provide your identification and complete the necessary paperwork. Otherwise, you'll be receiving an official notice, and I assure you, the fines accumulate quickly." For a moment, I considered it. Just hand over my driver's license, nod politely, make the problem go away. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he stood there, right in the middle of my walkway, feet planted like he owned the ground beneath them. Maybe it was simpler than that. I don't respond well to demands from strangers on my own property. "I'm not going to show you my ID, I said, "and I'm not filling out any forms. If you have concerns, you can put them in writing." Logan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He scribbled something on his clipboard with sharp, precise strokes. "Very well, Mr. Hall. You'll receive an official notice within 72 hours. I hope you'll reconsider your attitude before then." He turned and walked away without another word. I watched him until he disappeared around the corner. Then I picked up my paintbrush and went back to work. The sage green looked good against the white trim. That night, I found the box of documents my grandmother had left. Her deed, her paperwork, everything. I hadn't opened it yet. Now, I had a reason to.
If you're enjoying this story and want to see what happens next, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any part of this journey. And if you've ever had your own run-in with an HOA that overstepped its bounds, I'd love to hear about it. Drop your story in the comments below.
The envelope arrived 3 days later. I was making coffee when I heard the mailbox clang shut, and by the time I walked out to retrieve it, the mail carrier was already 2 houses down. Most of what I found was junk. Credit card offers addressed to my grandmother, a furniture catalog, and some local political flyers. But at the bottom of the stack was something different. A white envelope, thick and official-looking, with Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association printed in the upper left corner. The logo matched the one on Logan Campbell's polo shirt. I carried everything inside, set aside the junk, and opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an embossed letterhead, formatted like something a lawyer might send. The heading read, "Notice of Violation, Case Number 24-0892. Beneath that, in bold type, "Property at Maple Lane, exterior paint non-compliance." I read it twice to make sure I was understanding correctly. According to the notice, I had violated Article 4.3 of the Willowbrook Estates CCNRs by applying an unapproved exterior paint color. I had 14 days to restore the fence to its previous condition or repaint it using a color from the approved palette, which was apparently available upon request. Failure to comply would result in fines of $150 per day, plus administrative fees, plus the cost of any remediation the HOA chose to perform on my behalf. At the bottom of the page, a separate section requested copies of my government-issued ID, my property deed, and proof of current residency, all to update resident records. I set the paper down on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a long moment. Something felt off. The notice referenced property at Maple Lane, but it didn't include my actual street address. No house number, no lot number, just a vague geographical reference that could apply to any of the dozen properties along this road. I picked up my phone and dialed the number listed at the bottom of the notice. It rang 4 times before someone answered. "Willowbrook HOA, this is Logan." No receptionist, no automated menu, just Logan Campbell picking up the phone himself. "Mr. Campbell, this is William Hall," I said. "I received your notice." There was a brief pause, then a satisfied hum. "Mr. Hall, I'm glad you reconsidered. Have you reviewed the approved color palette? I can email you a copy if that would be helpful." I ignored the question. "The notice doesn't include my street address, just property at Maple Lane. I want to make sure this was actually intended for me." Another pause, shorter this time. "All properties in the Maple Lane area fall under Willowbrook jurisdiction. I assure you, there's no mistake." I pressed further. "Can you send me a copy of the CCNRs that apply to my property? I'd like to review the specific covenant I allegedly violated." Silence. Not the kind that comes from thinking, the kind that comes from not having an answer ready. When Logan spoke again, his voice had lost some of its smoothness. "Mr. Hall, every property in this area is part of Willowbrook Estates. That's simply how it works. The CCNRs are standard across the community. If you'd like, you can request a copy at our next board meeting, but I assure you, you are wasting your time looking for loopholes." I kept my voice calm. "I'm not looking for loopholes. I'm asking for documentation. If my property is subject to your rules, there should be a recorded declaration linking my parcel to your HOA. Can you point me to that?" His response was immediate and clipped. "I've been doing this for 12 years, Mr. Hall. I know which properties fall under our jurisdiction. Yours does. I strongly recommend you cooperate before this becomes more complicated. We have the authority to place a lien on non-compliant properties, and trust me, you don't want that on your record." A lien. That word landed heavier than the rest. A lien could cloud my title, complicate any future sale, or even affect my credit if it escalated far enough. But something about the way he said it, like a threat he'd used many times before, made me less scared and more curious. "I'll look into it myself," I said. "Have a good day, Mr. Campbell." I hung up before he could respond. I could have called him back. I could have yelled, demanded proof, or threatened to sue. But I've learned something over the years. When someone pressures you with authority they can't explain, you don't give them the reaction they want. You get quiet, you get organized, and you make them prove it. That evening, I finally opened the box of documents my grandmother had left. It was an old file box, the kind with a hinged lid and metal clasps, labeled in her careful handwriting, "House papers, important." Inside, I found decades of records, property tax statements, insurance policies, receipts for roof repairs, and appliance purchases. And at the very bottom, in a clear plastic sleeve, the deed. The paper was yellowed at the edges but perfectly legible. It described the property as Lot 7, Block 2, Maplewood Original Township, recorded in 1962. I scanned every line, looking for any reference to Willowbrook Estates, any covenant, any HOA declaration. Nothing. Just a clean transfer of ownership from the original developer to my grandmother, and then from her estate to me. No restrictions, no community association, no Logan Campbell. I photographed every page, opened a new folder on my laptop labeled Campbell Documentation, and saved the images with timestamps. Then I added a summary of our phone conversation. Date, time, what he said, and what he couldn't answer. My hands were steady as I closed the file box, but inside, something had shifted. This wasn't just about a fence or a paint color anymore. It was about a man who had spent 12 years telling people what they could and couldn't do, and no one had ever asked him to prove he had the right. The Jefferson County Recorder's Office was a squat brick building on the edge of downtown, the kind of government facility that hadn't been renovated since the 1980s. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air smelled like old paper and toner ink. I walked up to the front counter with a folder under my arm, my deed, a printout of Logan's violation notice, and a list of questions I'd written out the night before. A woman in her early 60s looked up from her computer screen and smiled. Her nameplate read, Melissa Allen, Senior Records Clerk. I explained my situation as concisely as I could. Inherited house on Maple Lane, an HOA claiming authority over it, and a need to verify. Melissa listened without interrupting, then asked for my parcel number. I handed her the deed. She typed for a few moments, squinting at her monitor, then pulled up a map on a second screen and pointed with her pen. "Here's your property, Lot 7, Block 2, Maplewood Original Township, recorded in 1962. She scrolled through a few more screens. "And here's Willowbrook Estates, subdivision established in 1998. She looked up at me. "Your house was built 36 years before that HOA even existed. They have no recorded declaration over your parcel. That was all I needed to hear. 1962 versus 1998. 36 years of difference. I asked about the lien threat. Her expression shifted from helpful to concerned. If they file a lien on a property they have no jurisdiction over, that's slander of title. You could sue for damages. She printed out certified copies of my property record and the subdivision map showing Willowbrook's boundaries. "Keep these safe," she said, "and document everything that man says to you." When I pulled into my driveway 20 minutes later, I saw him immediately. Logan Campbell was standing on the sidewalk across from my house, his phone raised, taking photographs of my property. He wasn't on my land. Technically, the sidewalk was public, but there was something deeply unsettling about seeing him there, documenting my home like evidence. I got out of my car and walked toward him, keeping my pace steady. He lowered his phone when he saw me approaching, but didn't move. "Mr. Hall," he said, his voice carrying that same patronizing tone. "I see the fence is still the wrong color. We'll be proceeding with the lien filing next week. I wanted to give you one last chance to reconsider." I stopped a few feet away from him. "I just came from the county recorder's office, Mr. Campbell. My property was recorded in 1962. Willowbrook Estates wasn't established until 1998. You have no jurisdiction here." His face reddened, starting at the neck and spreading upward. "You think you know the law better than me? I've been running this HOA for 12 years. Every property in this area falls under our authority. That's how it's always been." I kept my voice level. "Then show me the recorded declaration that includes my parcel." He didn't answer. Instead, he took a step closer, his jaw tight. "I've been doing this for 12 years, Mr. Hall. 12 years. People who fight us don't come out ahead. They come out exhausted, broke, and sorry they ever tried." He turned and started walking away, then stopped and looked back over his shoulder. "You'll regret choosing this path." I could have followed him. I could have called the police and reported him for harassment. But men like Logan Campbell operate in the gray zone. Standing on a public sidewalk isn't illegal. Taking photos from the street isn't a crime. Threatening a lien he can't file is wrong, but proving it requires patience, not confrontation. So I let him walk away. Then I went inside, opened my laptop, and added everything to the documentation folder. The time of our encounter, what he said word for word, and the fact that he'd been photographing my property. I scanned the certified documents from Melissa Allen and saved them with timestamps. The folder was getting thick.
That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. It wasn't the legal situation keeping me awake. I had proof. I had documents. I knew I was right. It was something else. The image of Logan standing across the street, phone raised, photographing my home like a predator marking territory. This wasn't about paint or procedures anymore. This was personal, and I had a feeling it was about to get worse.
A week passed. I finished painting the fence and tried to settle into something like a routine. The documents from the county recorder's office were safely stored, both digitally and in a fireproof box under my bed. I had proof. I had patience. I figured the worst was over. Then, on a Tuesday morning, my phone buzzed with a forwarded email from a former coworker who had connections in the area. The subject line read, "FW, Community Safety Alert, Maple Lane." I opened it, scrolled past the forwarding headers, and felt my stomach drop. The original message was from Logan Campbell, sent to what appeared to be the entire Willowbrook Estates mailing list, over 200 households. The body of the email was brief but devastating. "Dear neighbors," it began, "I am writing to alert you to a concerning situation on Maple Lane. A new occupant has recently moved into one of the adjacent properties and has refused to provide identification or proof of residency. He has been hostile to HOA representatives, has ignored multiple violation notices, and may be an unauthorized squatter. Please exercise caution when approaching this individual." Below the text was a photograph. It was me, standing in my own yard, paintbrush in hand. The image had been taken from a distance, from the sidewalk, the same spot where Logan had been standing with his phone raised. The effect was immediate. 2 days later, a woman pushing a stroller made eye contact with me on the sidewalk, then quickly looked away and crossed to the other side of the street. That same afternoon, I found an unsigned note in my mailbox, a single sheet of paper with 3 words scrawled in black marker: "Squatters go home." I stared at that note for a long time. It wasn't the insult that bothered me. It was the anonymity. Whoever wrote it didn't dare to sign their name, but they had enough conviction to accuse me of not belonging in my own home. I wanted to respond. I wanted to knock on every door in Willowbrook and show them my deed, my county records, the documentation that proved Logan Campbell was lying. But I knew how that would look. The angry outsider, desperate to prove himself. That wasn't a fight I could win by shouting. So I stayed quiet. I documented the note, photographed my mailbox, and added everything to the folder. 3 days after the email went out, someone knocked on my front door. I looked through the peephole and saw an elderly woman, maybe late 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She was holding a covered dish in both hands. I opened the door, and she smiled at me. The first genuine smile I'd seen from anyone in the neighborhood since I arrived. "You must be William," she said. "I'm Dolores Huang. I live 2 houses down. I was your grandmother's friend for over 40 years. I invited her inside. She set the dish on my kitchen counter, homemade dumplings, still warm, and looked around the room with soft nostalgia. Then her expression shifted from warm to serious. "I saw that email Logan sent. That man is a bully. He's been doing this for years. You're not the first person he's targeted." She told me about the Martinez family, who had lived in one of the original lots on Maple Lane. They weren't part of Willowbrook either, but Logan had harassed them relentlessly. Notices, fines, threats. Eventually, they gave up and sold their house. "But they didn't have documentation," Dolores said. "They didn't know their rights. You're different." Then she told me something that made everything click into place. A few years ago, Logan mentioned to me that he wanted to buy up the old lots on Maple Lane. Had a developer interested in expanding Willowbrook, but none of us would sell, your grandmother especially. Dolores paused. She told him this house would pass to her family, not to some contractor with a bulldozer. So, this wasn't just about authority. Logan Campbell wanted my land. Before she left, I asked Dolores if she'd be willing to write a statement about what she'd witnessed. Logan's pattern of harassment, his comments about buying the lots. She agreed without hesitation.
You know, Dolores said softly at the door, Carol once told me something I never forgot. She said, "This house is the only thing I ever truly owned. I won't let anyone take it. Don't let him win, William. She wouldn't have, and neither should you."
That evening, I received a call from my friend Kyle Robinson. His wife Judith was a real estate attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. He'd told her about my situation, and she wanted to talk. "William," Kyle said, "that email Logan sent, Judith says it could be defamation. Calling you a squatter in writing to 200 people when you have documented proof of ownership, that's actionable." I looked at the folder on my desk. The violation notices, the photographs, the anonymous note, Dolores' statement, waiting to be written. "Tell her I'm ready," I said. "Let's do this." I'm Michael Vincent, your storyteller today on Dear HOA. And if you were in William's position, publicly called a squatter in front of hundreds of people, while knowing you have every right to be there, what would you do? Leave your answer in the comments below, and let's see whose solution is the best. Thank you all. I spent the next 2 days doing what I do best, organizing information. My background in software development has taught me that complex problems become manageable when you break them down into documented steps. So, that's what I did. I cleared off the dining room table, spread out every piece of paper I'd collected, and started building a case. First, I created a timeline. I opened a spreadsheet and logged every interaction with Logan Campbell in chronological order. The date and time of our first encounter in the yard, the exact words he'd used, the violation notice and when it arrived, the phone call where he threatened a lien, our confrontation on the sidewalk, and the community email. For each entry, I noted what evidence I had, photographs, screenshots, written documents, or my own contemporaneous notes. Next, I organized the physical evidence. The certified copies from Melissa Allen at the county recorder's office went into a clear plastic sleeve, labeled and dated. The violation notice from the HOA went to another. I printed out the defamatory email and the photograph Logan had attached, along with metadata showing when it was sent and to how many recipients. The anonymous "Squatters Go Home" note went into an evidence bag I'd ordered online, handled only by the edges. Dolores had dropped off her written statement the day before, 2 handwritten pages describing Logan's harassment of the Martinez family, his comments about wanting to buy the original lots, and her 40-year friendship with my grandmother. Then I did research. Colorado is what's called a one-party consent state, which means that as long as one person in a conversation consents to being recorded, it's legal. I was that one person. I hadn't recorded my phone call with Logan, a mistake I wouldn't repeat, but I had taken detailed notes immediately afterward. Going forward, every interaction would be documented in real time. I pulled up Colorado's HOA statutes, specifically CRS, Section 3833.3, and read through the provisions about HOA authority, lien rights, and dispute resolution. The law was clear. An HOA's governing documents only apply to properties that are formally included in the recorded declaration. My property wasn't. I also researched slander of title more thoroughly. It's a legal claim that arises when someone falsely disparages your ownership of property, causing you damages. If Logan actually filed a lien against my house, a property his HOA had no jurisdiction over, that would be textbook slander of title. Combined with the defamatory email calling me a squatter, I was looking at multiple causes of action. I should have started documenting from day one, but who expects to need a lawyer just to paint a fence? That Friday evening, I drove to Kyle and Judith Robinson's house on the other side of the town. Kyle met me at the door with a handshake and a concerned look. "You look tired, man," he said. "This thing really got to you, huh?" I didn't deny it. He led me into the living room, where Judith was waiting at a desk covered with legal pads and case files. She was in her late 30s, with sharp eyes and the kind of calm demeanor that suggested she'd seen situations like mine before. "Kyle told me the basics," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "But I want to hear it from you. Start from the beginning." I walked her through everything. The first encounter, the violation notice, the lien threat, the sidewalk confrontation, the email, the anonymous note. I handed her the folder I'd compiled, the timeline, the evidence, Dolores's statement, and the certified county documents. She reviewed each item carefully, occasionally making notes in the margins of her legal pad. When she finished, she set down her pen and looked at me directly. "William, you have a solid case. Logan Campbell has committed defamation by calling you a squatter and writing to over 200 people when you have clear proof of ownership. He's engaged in harassment through repeated, unwanted contact and threats. And if he actually files that lien, it's slander of title." She paused. "What do you want to do?" I'd thought about this moment for days. Part of me wanted to go nuclear, file a lawsuit immediately, make Logan pay for every sleepless night and every whispered accusation. But another part of me remembered what I'd learned from years of dealing with difficult stakeholders at work. Escalation should be proportional and strategic. You don't start with a lawsuit if a warning will do the job. "I want him to stop," I said. "I want him to retract the email and admit publicly that my property isn't under his HOA's jurisdiction. And I want documentation that this happened in case he ever tries again." Judith nodded approvingly. Then we start with a cease and desist letter, sent certified mail to Logan personally and to the HOA board. We lay out the facts, cite the legal violations, and give them 10 days to comply. If they don't, we file suit for defamation, harassment, and intentional interference with property rights. If they do file a lien, we add slander of title and seek actual damages plus attorney's fees. She pulled out a fresh legal pad. "I'll draft it tonight. You can review it tomorrow, and we'll send it on Monday." I signed the retainer agreement before I left. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had control. There was a moment when Judith said, "You have a solid case," that I almost broke. Not from relief, from exhaustion. For 3 weeks, I'd been questioning myself, wondering if I was overreacting, if maybe I should just repaint the fence and let it go. And now, finally, someone with expertise was telling me I wasn't crazy, that what Logan did was wrong, that I had every right to fight back. I looked at the stack of papers on Judith's desk, my grandmother's deed, Logan's threats, the timeline I'd built piece by piece, and thought, this is how adults fight, not with fists, with evidence. 10 days passed. The cease and desist letter had been sent via certified mail, one copy to Logan Campbell personally, another to the Willowbrook Estates HOA board. Judith had drafted it with surgical precision, a summary of Logan's actions, the legal violations he'd committed, and a demand that he retract the defamatory email, issue a public correction, and cease all contact with me within 10 days. If he complied, we would consider the matter resolved. If he didn't, we would proceed with litigation. On day 11, Judith called me with an update. "No response," she said. "Not from Logan, not from the board. They're either ignoring us or hoping we'll go away." I wasn't surprised. Men like Logan don't back down from a letter. They need to be shown. "What's our next move?" I asked. Judith paused, and I could hear her tapping a pen against her desk. "Before we file suit, I want to try one more thing. I'm going to request a formal meeting with the HOA board. Just you, me, and them. We present the evidence directly and give them a chance to handle this internally. If they're reasonable people, they'll realize Logan has exposed them to liability and act accordingly. If they're not..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. We filed a written request for a board meeting the next morning. 3 days later, we received a response. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the Willowbrook Estates Community Center. The community center was a modest building at the entrance of the subdivision. Beige stucco walls, a small parking lot, and a sign out front announcing upcoming events. Judith and I arrived 15 minutes early. She carried a leather briefcase containing copies of every document we'd compiled. The deed, the county records, the subdivision map, the violation notices, the defamatory email, and transcripts of my recorded interactions with Logan. Yes, recorded. After my first mistake, not recording that initial phone call, I'd made sure to document every subsequent encounter. Colorado's one-party consent law meant I only needed my own permission to record, and I'd used it. When we walked into the meeting room, 7 people were already seated at a long folding table. Logan Campbell sat at the center, his posture rigid, his expression somewhere between annoyance and contempt. To his left was a woman I didn't recognize, mid-50s, glasses, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. The other 5 board members ranged in age from their 30s to their 60s, their faces neutral but watchful. I recognized one of them from Dolores's description, Richard Bailey, the accountant. He was the one who had been on the board the longest besides Logan. Judith and I took seats at a smaller table facing them, like witnesses at a hearing. Logan spoke first, his voice carrying that familiar condescension. Before we begin, I want to make clear that this is a private HOA matter. Mr. Hall is not a resident of Willowbrook Estates and has no standing to address this board. His presence here is a courtesy, nothing more. Judith didn't flinch. Actually, Mr. Campbell, that's exactly the issue we're here to discuss. My client's property is not part of Willowbrook Estates. It never has been. And yet you've sent him violation notices, threatened to place a lien on his home, and publicly accused him of being a squatter in an email to over 200 households. She opened her briefcase and began laying documents on the table. This is a certified copy of the property deed for Lot 7, Block 2, Maplewood Original Township, recorded in 1962. This is a subdivision map from the Jefferson County Recorder's Office showing the boundaries of Willowbrook Estates, established in 1998. As you can see, Mr. Hall's property is not within those boundaries. It was never annexed, never added, and has no recorded covenant linking it to your HOA. The room was silent. A few board members leaned forward to examine the documents. Richard Bailey picked up the subdivision map and studied it closely, his brow furrowed. "Logan," he said slowly, "did you verify any of this before you sent those notices?" Logan's face reddened. "Every property in this area falls under our jurisdiction. That's how it's always been. I've been running this HOA for 12 years, Richard. I know which houses are ours." Judith's voice remained calm and measured. "Mr. Campbell, that's how it's always been is not a legal argument. You claimed authority over a property you have no jurisdiction over. You threatened my client with a lien you have no right to file, and you publicly defamed him in writing." She pulled out another document, a printed transcript. "I also have a recording of Mr. Campbell threatening my client during a confrontation on the sidewalk outside his home. He stated, and I quote, 'We have the authority to place a lien on non-compliant properties. Trust me, you don't want that on your record.'" Logan's head snapped toward her. "You recorded me? That's illegal." Judith shook her head. "Colorado is a one-party consent state, Mr. Campbell. My client was a party to that conversation. The recording is entirely legal."
Logan stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the floor. His palms slammed down on the table. The vein on his neck pulsed visibly beneath flushed skin. "This is an attack. You people are going to sit here and let them ambush me like this? I've given 12 years to this community. 12 years." His voice cracked on the last word, not from volume, but from something underneath. Fear, maybe, or the sound of authority slipping through his fingers.
The board members exchanged uneasy glances. No one spoke. Richard Bailey set down the subdivision map and folded his hands. "Logan, I think we need to pause here. I'm going to propose that we consult with the HOA's legal counsel before we proceed any further. This is a lot to process." Logan stared at him for a long moment, his chest heaving. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the room. The door slammed behind him hard enough to rattle the windows. The silence that followed was heavy. One of the board members, a younger woman with short hair, let out a breath she'd apparently been holding. Richard Bailey looked at Judith and me with an expression that was part apology, part exhaustion. "We'll be in touch," he said quietly. I think we have some things to discuss." Judith gathered our documents, and we left without saying another word. In the parking lot, she turned to me with the faintest hint of a smile. "He just lost control in front of 7 witnesses. That's gonna matter." 2 weeks after the board meeting, Judith called with news. The HOA had hired its own attorney, a real one, not Logan, to review the situation. According to Judith's contacts, the lawyer had spent less than an hour examining the evidence before concluding. Logan Campbell had acted far outside his authority, and in doing so, he'd exposed the entire Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association to significant legal liability. Sending violation notices to a property that wasn't part of the HOA was bad enough. Threatening a lien was worse. But publicly defaming a homeowner in writing to over 200 people based on demonstrably false claims, that was the kind of mistake that ended careers and emptied bank accounts. The board had called an emergency session the very next day. Decisions had been made. "They want to settle," Judith said, her voice calm but carrying a note of satisfaction. Richard Bailey reached out to me this morning. The board is prepared to remove Logan from his position as president, effective immediately. They'll issue a formal apology to you in writing and send a retraction email to the entire Willowbrook mailing list, correcting the record about your property and your residency status. They're also willing to discuss financial compensation for the defamation and harassment you've experienced over the past several weeks. I sat down on my couch and let that sink in. After weeks of threats, anonymous notes, and sideways glances from neighbors, the people who had enabled Logan's behavior were finally acknowledging that he'd been wrong, that I had been right all along. "What about Logan himself?" I asked. "The board can remove him, but that doesn't stop me from suing him personally for what he did." Judith's voice was measured, the tone of someone who had navigated these situations many times before. "That's your choice, William. You absolutely have grounds for a personal lawsuit, defamation, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. With the evidence we've compiled, you would almost certainly win. But here's what I'd recommend. We give Logan two options. Option 1, he signs a settlement agreement. That would include a public written apology, $15,000 in damages paid directly to you, and a legally binding commitment to never contact you or come within 500 feet of your property again. Option 2, we file suit in civil court. We pursue him for defamation, harassment, and if he ever attempts to file that lien, slander of title as well. Given everything we have documented, the recordings, the emails, the witnesses, he would lose, badly. And the judgment would be much larger than $15,000. I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to drag him through the courts, to make him sit in a witness chair and explain himself under oath. But another part of me just wanted this to be over. "Give him the two options," I said. "Let him choose." The community meeting was held on a Saturday afternoon, 2 weeks after my conversation with Judith. Unlike the private board session where Logan had stormed out, this one was open to all Willowbrook residents. According to Judith, about 80 people showed up, nearly half the neighborhood, parents with children, elderly couples who'd lived there for decades, young professionals who'd bought their first homes in the subdivision. They filled the community center until there was standing room only along the back wall. I wasn't there. Judith had advised against it, saying my presence might seem confrontational and distract from the message the board needed to deliver. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about the community recognizing what had been done in their name, without their knowledge or consent. Instead, I waited at home, sitting on my grandmother's couch, checking my phone every few minutes like a nervous teenager waiting for test results. Dolores had promised to attend and report back. At 4:37, my phone rang. I answered before the first ring had finished. "It's done," Dolores said, her voice carrying a mixture of satisfaction and something softer underneath. Maybe relief, maybe closure. Richard Bailey stood up at the front of the room and read a statement to everyone. "Logan Campbell has been removed as president of the HOA, effective immediately. The board formally apologized to you by name, William. They admitted that violation notices had been sent to your property without any legal basis. They announced that all notices have been rescinded and that a retraction email would be sent to every household tonight, correcting the false claims Logan made about you." I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. For a moment, I couldn't speak. "Was Logan there?" I finally asked. "No," Dolores said. His chair at the front table was empty. Richard said that Logan had chosen not to attend. But everyone in that room knew what it really meant. He couldn't face them. Couldn't sit there while his 12 years of authority crumbled in front of everyone he'd spent so long trying to impress. She paused, and I heard her take a breath. "There's something else, William." During the meeting, one of the board members, the younger woman with short hair, I think her name is Patricia, she stood up and asked a question. She asked how this had been allowed to happen for so long. How one man had been able to harass residents, send false notices, and threaten people's homes without anyone checking whether he had the authority to do so. Dolores's voice dropped. Richard didn't have a good answer. He admitted that no one on the board had ever verified Logan's claims about jurisdiction. They had just trusted him. For 12 years, they let him do whatever he wanted because he acted like he knew what he was doing, because he had a clipboard and a polo shirt and an attitude that said, "I'm in charge," and no one ever asked him to prove it. I thought about all the people Logan must have intimidated over the years. The Martinez family, who sold their home and moved to Arizona just to escape him. Others I'd never know about. How many had simply given up because they didn't have the documentation, the resources, or the stubborn refusal to back down? 1 week later, Judith called with the final update. Logan had signed the settlement agreement. He would issue a written apology acknowledging that he had made false statements about my residency and ownership status. He would pay $15,000 in damages. And he would agree to a permanent no-contact order. No calls, no letters, no approaching my property, no contact of any kind for the rest of his life. In exchange, I would drop any pending legal claims against him. "There's one more thing," Judith said, her voice taking on a different tone. Not quite anger, but something close to disgust. During our discovery process, before he agreed to settle, we obtained access to some of Logan's personal emails. He'd been in communication with a property development company called Harmon Group for the past 3 years. They specialize in subdivision expansions, buying adjacent land and building new homes that get folded into existing HOAs. I felt my jaw tighten. Go on. According to the emails, Logan had been telling them he could clear out the original lots on Maple Lane and make them available for purchase. He specifically mentioned your grandmother's property by address. He told them the owners were elderly and wouldn't put up a fight. He estimated he could have all 4 original lots vacated within 2 years. I thought about what Dolores had told me weeks ago. Logan's casual comments about buying up the old properties, his interest in expanding Willowbrook. It hadn't just been idle talk or ego. He'd had a plan, a business arrangement. So he wasn't just on a power trip, I said. He was trying to force people out so he could profit from selling their land. That's exactly what it looks like, Judith replied. The Martinez family, your grandmother's property, the other original lots, they were all targets. Logan figured if he harassed people long enough, threatened them with fake fines and impossible liens, they'd eventually give up and sell below market value, and for a while, it worked. The Martinez family sold. Others probably did too before you even arrived. Judith told me later that Logan cried when he signed the settlement. Not loudly. No sobs, no dramatic breakdown, just quiet tears that he kept wiping away with the back of his hand, smearing the ink on the page. She said he looked smaller somehow, deflated, like someone had let the air out of him. 12 years of strutting around the neighborhood with a clipboard and a title, and in the end, it had all been exposed as nothing more than bluster and forged authority. I didn't feel sorry for him, but I didn't feel triumphant either. I just felt tired and relieved and strangely empty. That evening, Dolores stopped by with another dish of homemade dumplings. We sat on the porch as the sun went down, watching the shadows lengthen across the yard and listening to the crickets begin their evening chorus. She didn't say much at first, just sat there in the rocking chair that had once belonged to my grandmother, looking at the sage-green fence with a small, knowing smile on her face. The silence between us was comfortable, the kind that only comes from shared understanding. Finally, she spoke.
I called the Martinez family today. Maria and her husband are still in Tucson. I told them everything that happened, the board meeting, the settlement, and Land Ogan being removed. Maria cried on the phone. She said she wished they'd fought back the way you did, but they didn't have anyone in their corner. They didn't have the documents, the lawyer, or the stubbornness to see it through. They just had Logan, pounding on their door, telling them they didn't belong. Dolores turned to look at me, her eyes bright in the fading light. You did something important, William. Not just for yourself, for everyone. Logan ever tried to bully them out of their homes. People will hear about this. And maybe next time someone like him tries to pull this kind of thing, people will remember that it's possible to fight back, that it's possible to win.
1 month later, autumn had settled fully over Maplewood. The leaves on the maple trees that gave the town its name had turned brilliant shades of gold and crimson, carpeting the sidewalks and lawns with color. The air carried that particular crispness that comes only in late October, cool enough for a jacket, warm enough to spend an afternoon outside. I stood in my front yard, paintbrush in hand, applying the final strokes to the last section of fence I hadn't finished back when this whole thing started. The sage green paint had held up well over the past several weeks, but there was one corner post I'd never gotten around to completing. Logan Campbell had interrupted me that first day, and somehow, finishing the job had felt like tempting fate while everything was still unresolved. Now, with the settlement signed and the retraction emails sent and Logan's chair sitting empty at HOA meetings, it felt right to complete what I'd started. What my grandmother had started, really. The sticky note she'd left on those paint cans, "For the Fence, Spring Project," was still stuck to my refrigerator, her handwriting a daily reminder of why I'd refused to back down. The neighborhood felt different now. Not dramatically transformed. The houses still looked the same. The streets still followed the same curves. The community center still hosted weekend events. But there was a shift in the atmosphere, something subtle that you'd only notice if you'd lived through what I had. People waved when they drove past my house. Not everyone, but enough to notice. A few had even stopped by to introduce themselves properly, bringing cookies or casseroles or bottles of wine as peace offerings. They didn't always mention Logan by name, but the apologies were there, hidden in phrases like, "I should have asked more questions," and "I didn't realize what was happening." I accepted their gestures graciously. There was no point in holding grudges against people who had simply believed what they were told by someone in authority. That was the whole problem, wasn't it? People trust titles. They trust clipboards and official letterheads and men who speak with confidence. They don't ask for documentation because it never occurs to them that someone might be lying. Logan had counted on that for 12 years, and for 12 years, it had worked. The news about Logan and his wife came through Dolores, as most neighborhood news did. They had put their house on the market 2 weeks after the settlement was signed, priced it below market value for a quick sale, and closed within 10 days. No one knew where they went. Arizona, someone speculated. Florida, said someone else. The truth was, no one really cared enough to find out. Logan Campbell had been the center of Willowbrook's universe for over a decade, and now he was simply gone. A footnote, a cautionary tale, a name that would come up occasionally at board meetings when someone proposed a new policy and an older member would say, "Remember what happened with Logan? Let's make sure we verify this first." The HOA had already changed its bylaws. Any violation notice now requires documented proof of jurisdiction before it can be sent. Any claim of authority over a property had to be verified against county records. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small protection for the next person who might find themselves targeted by someone with a clipboard and an inflated sense of power. I used the $15,000 from the settlement to establish a scholarship fund at Maplewood Elementary School. The Carol Baker Memorial Scholarship, awarded annually to a graduating fifth grader who has demonstrated kindness, integrity, and respect for others. The school principal had been surprised when I called to propose it. Scholarships from private individuals weren't common at the elementary level, but when I explained who my grandmother was, her face lit up with recognition. Carol Baker? She used to volunteer here every Tuesday. Read stories to the first graders. The kids loved her. I hadn't known that. There was so much about my grandmother's life in this community that I was still discovering, small kindnesses and quiet contributions that she'd never thought to mention. The scholarship felt like a fitting way to honor that legacy, not a monument to anger or vindication, but something that would help someone else, year after year, long after the details of what happened with Logan had faded from memory. A week after Logan moved away, someone hung a small wooden sign at the entrance to Willowbrook Estates, right below the official subdivision marker. It read, "Community means everyone. Welcome, Maple Lane." No one admitted to putting it there. The HOA board discussed removing it at their next meeting, but Richard Bailey argued against it. "Leave it," he said. "It's a good reminder." The sign stayed. It's still there now, weathered slightly by rain and sun, but readable. A small gesture from an anonymous neighbor, a quiet acknowledgement that the boundaries Logan had tried to enforce were never real to begin with. I finished the last stroke of paint and stepped back to admire the completed fence. The sage green looked exactly as my grandmother had envisioned it. Soft but distinctive, complementing the white trim of the house and the autumn colors of the garden she'd planted decades ago. I cleaned my brush, sealed the paint can, and carried everything back to the garage. When I returned to the front yard, a woman was walking past on the sidewalk, someone I didn't recognize, probably from one of the newer houses in Willowbrook. She slowed as she approached, looking at the fence with an appreciative expression. "Nice color," she said, smiling. "Thanks," I replied. "My grandmother picked it out." She nodded and continued on her way, and I watched her go with something that felt almost like peace. No demands for identification, no threats of fines or liens, just a compliment from a stranger, the kind of ordinary interaction that should have been possible from the very beginning. That evening, I sat on the porch as the sun went down, a cup of coffee warming my hands. The sage-green fence glowed softly in the fading light. Inside the house, my grandmother's photograph hung on the wall where it had always been. Carol Baker, smiling in her garden, surrounded by the flowers she'd loved. I'd added a small frame next to it, the sticky note from the paint cans, preserved behind glass. For the fence, spring project. She never got to finish it herself, but it was done now.
I don't know if I won. That word feels too simple for what happened. I kept my home. I protected my grandmother's legacy. I made a man who had spent 12 years bullying his neighbors face real consequences for the first time in his life. But I also spent weeks feeling like a stranger in my own neighborhood, questioning whether I was overreacting, wondering if it would have been easier to just repaint the fence and let it go. In the end, I didn't let go, and I did it without becoming someone I'd be ashamed of, without threats, without violence, without stooping to Logan's level. I fought with documentation and patience, and the quiet conviction that I had every right to be here. Maybe that's what winning looks like. Not a trophy or a parade, just sitting on your own porch, drinking coffee, looking at a sage-green fence, and knowing that no one can take this away from you. Not anymore. Not ever.